Well, I think that's a negative. You know, let's go positive. Everything exists. Obviously, there are cases and there aren't cases. Intimidation is both ways as well. So let's just try and sort this problem out, which is really the way forward.
Don't landlords bear some responsibility for renting out substandard properties?
Look, we don't bear any responsibility because most of these homes were rented out 30, 40 years ago. We're not renting them out as they are now. These, as you know, I've shown you around my house, there's 5 rooms empty here, and I can't rent them out anyway, legally. So there's no renting today to the condition that they are. That's for sure, Ramon.
What are the obstacles to bringing these places to a livable standard?
Well, I try, any complaints I get from my tenants, I try to correct. You know, in other words, in this case, he obviously hasn't got a roofing problem, but in that case over there, I think 5 times I've done the roof already for her. There's not very much I can do either, because, as I said, I mean, whatever they ask me to do, I normally do for them. And we get on very well. We have no problem. So in that sense, I have no problem. The only thing I have now is that I've got an empty building, and until I can't do anything more to it. So I've lost rent, and I'm losing rent. Not that I was getting a lot, but I'm losing now rent. And I've got an empty building which decays faster than occupied. So, you know, and it is in a few places, it is a bit tricky. So, you know, really, that's why I'm going on about this liaison thing, you know, with the government. Because I think it's important that landlords should be able to present their case individually to the minister or to the liaison officer. The other point was the point that I think you know, if they're looking for houses, they should look at people that have alternative houses apart from the government house that they have. Alternative house either in Gibraltar or in Spain or in England or wherever else in the world, which is happening all over Europe now. Which anybody who has a house anywhere else is not entitled to social housing. I think that would be a big impact in Gibraltar, the number of people that have alternative houses and live in council flats.
Do you believe this long-standing problem then is as a result of the government not changing legislation on, for example, rent control?
Well, it started with rent restriction. Obviously, that mainly applies to Gibraltarians. With the case of the Moroccans, it's mainly the conversion from workers' hostel to communal tenements. Which happened about 25, 30 years ago, because government, you could in 3 months shut down a workers' hostel, and therefore 2 people did that, and there was about 50 or 60 people in the streets, and government panicked, and they changed everything to communal tenancy overnight without warning, and they created that problem. And then what happened was that they didn't give the Moroccans the British national, so they couldn't move from here. They were stuck here. Now that they've got British citizenship, they're entitled to housing. So that's why now you've got 500 of them needing houses now, when they could have done over a 20-year period, and it wouldn't be the problem it is today. So yes, I think the main responsibility of social housing is not on private landlords, it's on government.
What measures would you like to see from the government to tackle this problem?
Well, I think they're beginning to, from what I heard from the minister, they're beginning to tackle it. They need to build a few blocks of rented accommodation, because there doesn't seem to be any. And as I keep stressing, this liaison thing with the landlords, because there are some properties, like you've seen in mine, that I've got just 3 tenants, and if those 3 tenants were moved, then I could develop the property. I can't do anything until those tenants are moved. That's why the liaison officer with the landlords and the tenants would, I think, improve, you know, and give the government a very clear picture of what's going on. I mean, I'm surprised they don't know that this exists. I mean, you know, it's been here for 40 years. So.
What representations will you be making to government on this issue?
Well, I'm making very little representation, because I believe in the system. It's not very good at the moment, but I believe that, you know, things will get better. I don't like really. I have nowhere to go. I don't know who to go to, unless I go to the minister and beg her to give them all houses. What else can I do? You tell me.
So what has brought on this action by the government? This is work that has been tackled by Action for Housing long before it was shown on Viewpoint.
Well, and indeed by the government itself. If you look at the things that the government has been doing, we have been trying to deal with aspects of this issue. But I think the harrowing images that we saw on Viewpoint, and I think an important journalistic contribution to the debate, have led us to try and see whether we can find other solutions which might enable us to accelerate the way that these matters are resolved for people who are continuing to suffer problems today.
We've also seen solutions offered to the long-standing problem of the agency workers issue recently. Could people be forgiven for thinking the timing has something to do with election year?
I think it's a little unfair to connect everything that's happening in January to elections that I've already said, or February, to elections I've already said are not going to happen until much later in the year. You know that I'd made a commitment in May of last year to deal with the issue of agency workers in the civil service. So I had accepted I was delayed in dealing with that, and I had repeated my commitment in my New Year's message this year, some weeks ago, and I acted promptly after that. So you're connecting everything to the electoral timetable. Might seem like it's sensible, but it's not the way that the government is operating. There are lists of things that we have to do. That's the way that you manage a community like Gibraltar at any time, whether there's an election or not an election. You have to achieve the resolution of those issues in order to deliver effective management. Things are sometimes taking longer now because of Brexit, in other instances for other reasons, but we have to deliver those solutions, in particular in respect of areas where people are, if I say suffering, I mean it's not in relation to agency workers as much as I mean it's in relation to those suffering living conditions of the sort that we've seen, although I accept that in the case of some agency workers they were unable to plan their lives, and that in itself was something that needed to be resolved.
The government has said it was not aware of the specific cases in Viewpoint, but at least 2 of them have featured in a previous programme and been put to government months ago.
Well, put to the government journalistically, but not put to the government in the way that things need to be dealt with to resolve. Now, what it appears to us is that unfortunately there are some people who find it possible to go to a camera and to explain to a camera what they are going through, but they don't find it possible to go to a government agency and address their complaints in that way. And so I think the resolution that we've made is to say, right, if this hasn't been dealt with already, you've shown it on your screens once, you've shown it on your screens twice, the person has not gone through the process that we would expect them to go through, but we're not going to stop that from having us address the subject. And that's what I think we're doing now. I think we're reacting almost like citizens ourselves, and like citizens might expect us to do. We don't want to continue to see these circumstances prevailing in Gibraltar. We've been seeking to act in a particular way. We haven't been able, obviously, to see a resolution of the issues in that way. We've got to take another tack. But to a very great extent, this is a problem that we have brought upon ourselves because the applicants that we're dealing with have only been able to become applicants for housing as a result of a much more progressive approach to nationality that we've taken, which enables these individuals to actually become applicants for government housing. So I think we've done a number of good things. We've resolved a number of problems, the nationality issue being one of them. 1/4 of those who've come onto the list have already been housed. Absolutely right. You don't take your cameras to the homes of those who are happily housed. You take your cameras to those that continue to suffer the problem, and therefore it's something we need to continue to address.
The government has said current legislation is being reviewed. Does this include rent restriction laws?
So this is an issue that I think we've said before we are dealing with. It's just not the specific issue of rent control for landlords. It's the whole law relating to land in Gibraltar and how arrendaments are rented out, etc., etc. Because I think it's important that we deal with it, both in relation to what we control and what we decontrol, and how we deal with controlled and decontrolled property. This is a vexed issue. It's going to be very difficult for us to square the circle in a way that works for all the stakeholders, and it's very likely that all stakeholders are going to have to suffer an element of pain as the review is implemented, as the results of the review are implemented, because there isn't a one-size-fits-all policy here, but of course a law has to apply across the board. So you're going to have to provide for people to pay a rent which is more meaningful, at the same time as you're not going to be in a position to allow a free-for-all in respect of rents in relation to all property in Gibraltar, because that would be equally unfair. So a resolution of how that review is implemented will be a complex and difficult thing.
The government has said penalties will be increased. What is it to penalise and how?
Well, you see, unfortunately, a lot of the penalties in our laws have fallen into the sort of level where it's irrelevant to the person that might be subject to the sanction. So we need to update those parts of our laws where we still have specific monetary values in respect of fines, etc., and ensure that the fines are related to scales. The scales are the ones which are updated, and therefore those scales make more relevant the fines that might be applicable, and in my view perhaps even connect the fine, the penalty, to the sort of income that has been derived from the property, in the way that in some instances fines relating to taxation are related to the amounts of tax evaded. It might make sense to consider, in the context of the review, connecting the penalty to the amount of rents received or potentially to be received in future.
You've emphasised that landlords who threaten reprisals will be penalised. What is this based on?
Well, in fact, some of the things that we've seen on Viewpoint that suggest that people are afraid of making reports because they fear that their landlord is going to somehow take it out on them. And I think what came across on your Viewpoint program, which I thought was very balanced, was that this is not just a case of unscrupulous landlords exploiting tenants. You have landlords that are in a real fix and in a real bind because they haven't got enough income coming from the property in order to be able to repair it. And then you've got some tenants also who are abusive of the system. I think the reference to the case that Brian Francis talked about demonstrated that there was also the possibility for tenants to abuse the system. And that's why I think you've got to ensure that you deal with this in the round. But if there is a complaint from tenants of landlords who are being in some way potentially abusive in the approach that they take to those who make proper complaints to the environmental agency or to the government about their living conditions, then that has to be dealt with.
How will other properties be identified for the future systematic investigation the government has proposed?
So the important thing here is that where we are unable to point to a complaint that has been made by a tenant, we need to have the consciousness that there are nonetheless arrediments which are not fit for human habitation. So if you can find them, we can find them too. And my view is that we can, through the environmental agency, be proactive in seeking out those circumstances in which people are living. If there has been this fear that landlords are somehow going to take it out on tenants if they snitched on them to the environmental agency or the government, and so we can try and sniff out where these properties may be. We obviously won't be asking you for your sources, but a lot of people have identified themselves, and we will be able to use that to start the process of dealing with this problem.